a girl blessed by the love of a sea dragon, an emperor favored by the ocean. They were the rulers of Atlantis. She, the empress of this grand empire, Atlantis, was named Tarassa Neptunos. Her beloved, a sage named Soren, told her that her empire would last forever. Her closest friend, General Dominic, also swore to remain by her side until the very end. She wondered if this oath was one of a subject to their emperor, or one of a lover to Tarassa. Soren took the empress's soft hand, the hand of his beloved. He placed a kiss upon Tarassa's hand, answering her question. It was neither. Today, Tarassa found her lover to be particularly sweet. Isn't that right, Dominic? Tarassa turned to ask her dear friend. Dominic knelt, stating he meant nothing else, Your Majesty. Tarassa was unsure how to interpret this. She turned to Soren, stating that he was the only one in her heart, and Tarassa believed it would always be this way. But tears welled in Tarassa's eyes when she discovered her two most beloved together. Tarassa witnessed Dominic confessing his feelings to Soren. He declared his love for Soren above all else. Resting his head on Soren's shoulder, Dominic told him he loved him enough to rip out his own heart. How could Soren not know his feelings? He embraced Dominic tightly. Tarassa stood outside, witnessing this scene, stunned and in disbelief. Tears fell from the eyes of the most powerful woman on the continent. The two men she loved most had betrayed her, choosing each other. Tarassa couldn't bear the pain. She quickly covered her face and fled, but the truth remained. She knew her lover and her friend were in love. But why? Soren had said he loved her. How could he betray her so openly? Tarassa returned to the palace, her mind in turmoil. She still couldn't believe it was true. Tarassa wanted to deceive herself, to believe she had misunderstood them. But following their confession, the two men plotted a grand conspiracy together. General Dominic marched his army before Her Majesty. Her confidant, Tarassa, still reeling from the betrayal, faced another blow. Her closest friend was betraying her. Dominic stood before Her Majesty, heartbroken to do this. He bowed his head, begging for her forgiveness. Tears streamed down Tarassa's face, believing this couldn't be real. Finally, she had to accept the truth. They had betrayed her. Dominic had hoped Tarassa would figure it out. Soren appeared, believing it would make the conversation easier. Without a word, he took Tarassa's hand, deceiving her until the very last moment, claiming he had something to show her. He bound her wrists with chains. This had been his plan all along. They locked her in a room, alone. Dominic waited outside, listening for the Empress's reaction. They could hear Tarassa calling their names. In the cold room, bound by chains, her hair obscuring her face, Tarassa realized this was what her lover wanted to show her. Resentment made her bite her lip, but no one came to help her. Standing amidst the heavy chains, Tarassa screamed in despair. How could they do this to her? She had trusted and loved him so much, yet Soren had betrayed her so cruelly. Soren entered the room. He stood before her, simply saying, "I'm sorry." Tarassa looked up, tears still streaming down her face. She asked if this was the answer he wanted her to know. Unrepentant, Soren said he wanted to protect the one he loved. His words cut like a knife into Tarassa's vulnerable heart. She realized that the man she loved and her confidant had betrayed her. Why was this happening to her? She had always been so good to them. Her Majesty's gaze fell upon her former lover. Perhaps she had given her heart to the wrong person. She wondered what she had done wrong to deserve such pain. But in that moment, she realized it wasn't her fault. This had been Soren's intention from the beginning. She told him that he would regret his decision. Tarassa strained against the chains, vowing never to forgive them. Tears streamed down her face as she ground her teeth, declaring that even in death, she would curse them for 1,000 lifetimes. And so, Tarassa was sealed in grief and despair, enduring a millennium of torment. Her resolve never wavered, her intent for vengeance unwavering. For 1,000 years, Tarassa endured the agony, yearning to break free from her chains. If there were a miracle, a chance to start anew, she desperately wanted to seize that moment. Tarassa screamed, asking if anyone could hear her. Finally, she noticed cracks appearing on the ceiling. During her imprisonment, she heard sounds from the outside. Tarassa guessed it was the sound of rain. She smelled the metallic tang of blood. Tarassa believed the seal was broken, but she was no longer her former self. She had become a babe held in the arms of a servant. Tarassa saw a masked figure in black fire an arrow towards her. The servant shielded her with their body. The servant collapsed, motionless, but but their grip on the infant never loosened. The masked figure pointed their sword, demanding Princess Lysander knife. As a baby, Tarassa couldn't comprehend the situation. She saw the reflection of her infant self in the assassin's eyes. She didn't understand what was happening. Was this her new life? A surge of Soren's magic pulsed, shattering the chains that had once bound Tarassa. Her senses returned. She felt the heavy rain. The drumming of the rain awakened her. Tarassa thought she had returned to Atlantis, but that wasn't the case. Now, she was merely an infant sucking on her fingers. Anyone could tell she was a baby. Tarassa pinched her own cheek, wondering if she was dreaming. It hurt, so she could only whimper like a baby. The servant held her tightly, promising to get Princess Lysander to Wongsong safely, asking her to bear with it for a little while. Tarassa was surprised to be called a princess. She widened her eyes adorably. The assassin held their sword to the servant's throat. Tarassa lay safely in her arms. They offered their life in exchange for the princess. Despite being struck by the arrow, the servant refused, questioning who they thought they were dealing with. The assassin narrowed their eyes, recognizing Princess Knife. They repeated their demand. They mockingly mentioned the Duchess's grief. The servant told them to shut up. The assassin lunged, stating they would return the princess to her mother. Tarassa felt the imminent danger, panic rising. Suddenly, the maid's hand flashed, a blood-stained knife held within. Blood splattered onto the ground. She slashed the assassin's face, ripping the mask, forcing him to clutch his face in pain. The assassin abandoned the attack. Tarassa realized this woman was no ordinary servant, but the maid knew her limits. She was already injured. More masked figures appeared. They weren't alone. Tarassa knew they were after her, not the maid. If she had Tarissa's body, not this helpless infant form, she could obliterate them in an instant. Her last memories as Tarassa were a dream. Even the memory of Soren and Dominic abandoning her, betraying her, was a dream. Even the memory of Tarissa's death had not decayed. How pathetic, how pitiful. With those memories, she truly was a useless empress. That sickening nightmare had repeated every night for 1,000 years. No matter the cost, she would return. Now, opening her eyes, all she thought of was revenge. But in reality, she was an infant hunted by masked assassins. The maid was overpowered, the baby falling to the ground. She watched in horror as Princess Knife lay on the ground, eyes closed. Tarassa thought revenge was paramount. Reincarnation or possession didn't matter. She had to help this maid. She would survive. She wouldn't die like this. She had suffered enough in her past life. The assassins surrounded the maid, who screamed helplessly. Tarassa focused her mind, controlling the falling raindrops. She knew she could do it, her infant eyes holding an unnerving intensity. Tarassa, eyes fixed on them as if performing a miracle, manipulated the water droplets to launch her attack. The tiny droplets possessed surprising force, making the assassins cry out in shock. They released the maid, falling to their knees, clutching their faces in agony. Seeing their helplessness, the infant crawling on the ground was overjoyed. She laughed, pointing at them, mocking the anemone-like figures. The maid realized with astonishment that the baby had saved her. Scooping up the princess, she marveled at the fulfillment of the prophecy. She told Knive that many were after her, making her a target. But the infant ignored her, distracted by a scent. The smell of the sea in this forest was utterly perplexing. Seeing the infant's focus, the maid asked what was wrong. Then she saw the enormous wave approaching, her blood running cold. She prepared to flee with the princess. The infant, however, was thrilled. The maid pleaded with her to stop. Tarassa was astonished to find that even in this infant body, the sea still answered to her power. She hadn't felt such exhilaration in 1,000 years. But the terrified maid held the infant tightly. Tarassa reveled in the spray of the seawater. The maid thought the princess was being reckless, urging her to stop, but the wave didn't attack. It curled into a protective arc, encircling them. The bewildered maid attributed this to the princess's power. Even the infant wasn't sure if it was her power. It felt more like Tarassa's. The maid hoped it truly was the princess's power, so she could face any enemy safely. As the prophecy foretold, the maid hoped the princess would become the Dragon Lord. The infant didn't know what a Dragon Lord was. Was it like ruling a nation, as she once had? The maid, assuming she was tired, suggested rest. But that wasn't what Knive wanted. Crying, she wanted to know what a Dragon Lord was. Suddenly unable to speak, unfamiliar memories flooded her her mind. Her father fighting to protect her mother, overpowered by assassins. Her mother telling Aiden to take her to the Emperor, a tearful farewell, begging her to live. Despite her protests, Aiden carried her away from the castle. Tarassa realized these were Nive's forgotten memories resurfacing. Her parents had been assassinated, and Aiden had saved her. Perhaps the seal had blocked her past life's memories. Reborn, she realized she was both Tarassa and Nive, but this tiny body felt alien. Cute, but inconvenient. Now, just a babe lying in a cradle, she sighed in frustration. Tarassa held her head, unable to believe she'd gone from the great queen of the ocean to this small infant. But as a duke's daughter, her status wasn't too bad. Still, Tarassa found it absurd. The city she'd seen during their escape was familiar. It was the empire she'd built, Atlantis. It was the nation those traitors had built, Soren and Dominic. From Empress to a duke's daughter, Nive sighed. How could they do this to her? Noticing the cracks on the ceiling and windows, she thought being near the sea wasn't so bad. But those traitors, she would have her revenge. Aiden entered, surprised to find the princess awake, wriggling in her cradle. Aiden picked her up, guessing she wasn't used to being a duke's daughter yet, cheerfully announcing it was time to eat. She urged her to grow up quickly. Nive agreed. She needed to grow to escape this tiny body to take her revenge. She needed to know what magic Soren had used. Nive clenched her tiny fists, deciding her first priority was to eat. She looked at Aiden, urging her to hurry up and bring it. Aiden thought the little princess had a good appetite, but Nive wanted real food, not milk. She shook her head in frustration. Aiden laughed, thinking she was adorable, completely misunderstanding her. Holding the princess, she thought Lord Nive, her father, would be so happy. Suddenly, a noise startled Aiden. Knowing the princess's brothers would return soon, Aiden placed her back in the cradle. Nive had no idea who these brothers were, but she heard Aiden mention the battle with the JoJo pirates had ended today, so Aiden anticipated their return. Nive was curious about these brothers. Outside, His Majesty arrived, and 2 servants bowed. Inside, Nive sensed the lingering power of water. Unless this was Atlantis, her former home, how could such power exist here? His Majesty's face was familiar. Could it be Soren? A flicker of unease ran through her. His Majesty approached quickly, and Nive scrutinized him from his feet to his hair. She wanted to believe it wasn't Soren. It couldn't be. But who was this man who looked like Soren? Aiden bowed before His Majesty. He looked at the infant for a long moment, then asked Aiden if this child was the final sacrifice. He remarked that she looked much like her mother. He inquired about Lysander and her husband. Aiden reported that a lowly servant had escaped with the young lady. Thinking of the princess's parents, Aiden paused. Someone was targeting the prophecy, aiming to wipe out the entire family. She clenched her fists in anger. Nive, sensing the surging power of water within His Majesty, felt a mixture of confusion and breathlessness. The power carried a dark aura that frightened her. As he drew closer, the power felt different from her own. He instructed Aiden to arrange the Duke and Duchess's funeral. He granted Aiden permission to attend. She thanked him for his grace. He would also allow the child to attend her parents' funeral. He considered her a vital asset in curing the dragon's frenzy, ordering her to be well cared for. Nive was annoyed by his repeated reference to her as a sacrifice. She wasn't some panacea, but she was relieved that the crown prince had 3 choices. She wasn't the only one. If there was a frenzy, why not just add sea urchin spines and seaweed to the potion? Why target an ordinary person like her? This emperor resembled Soren, but his personality was completely different. She wanted to ask what he was doing, but could only make infant noises. Seeming to understand, His Majesty asked if she wanted to know who he was. She certainly did. He introduced himself as a friend of her parents, Gaiden and Neil Lysander, and as Emperor Soren. Hearing the name, Nive was horrified. Holding his scepter, he announced himself as Ario Soren. Nive was stunned. He was Soren's descendant. Despite being an infant, she trembled with rage. He did that, and now even named himself after the nation. Tears welled up. If he wanted the throne that badly, she wouldn't hesitate to give it to him. Ario sneezed, as if someone had mentioned his name. Nive guessed he must be Soren's descendant. She recalled Dominic's tearful confession, his heart-wrenching love for Soren. They claimed to love each other so deeply, yet that bastard was with another woman. Consumed by fury, she didn't notice Ario picking her up. She hated seeing his face so close. Like any startled infant, she screamed and flailed, demanding to be put down. Ario was taken aback by her intense reaction, and even the servants were puzzled. Nive thought if she just turned her head, he wouldn't know this brute force was hurting her. Ario assumed she was hungry or bored. He gently put her down, thinking she needed a diaper change. He mistook her struggles for affection. He told her she didn't need to act so serious. The Emperor chuckled, finding her strange but amusing. He noted her reaction as if she understood what he was saying. A servant scoffed, saying she was just a baby. How could she possibly communicate? Ario asked the servant to repeat what they had said. Terrified, the servant knelt and begged for forgiveness, thinking they had been reprimanded. But as Ario placed Nive back in the cradle, he realized she probably couldn't understand him. Seeing no reaction, he assumed she was afraid of him. Nive felt ridiculous, feigning indifference. Ario leaned down again, asking if she wasn't scared. Nive crossed her arms, thinking, who does he think he is? Ario smiled, pleased to think he'd gotten an answer. He patted her head, saying he knew she wasn't afraid. He decided to play a game, thinking she wouldn't be startled. Nive was curious. Ario started playing peekaboo. The dignified emperor engaging in such childish behavior amused the servants. Nive remained expressionless. A perplexed Ario suddenly remembered his deceased sister, her unborn child. She had tearfully pleaded with her husband, if they died young, to protect their children, to not let them become sacrifices to break the royal curse. Lost in memories, he felt powerless. He couldn't protect his sisters or his wife. In his anguish, he inquired about the preparations for the sacrificial ritual and that child. He was informed she had survived the night. The hunt was over. A servant questioned if she was truly the Dragon King's daughter. Ario silenced him. A pained Ario threatened the servant. Seemingly reckless, for 1,000 years, the Soylern royal family had suffered a curse. Hallucinations leading to death, bodies racked with agonizing pain, torn apart by madness. Every emperor endured this torment, a ceaseless cycle. The royal family offered sacrifices. Duke Lysander was one of them. His ancestor, the Dragon Lady, was said to have cured the first emperor's madness. Her dying wish was that one day, a new Dragon Lady would be born into the Lysander family, absolving the Soylern royal family of their sins. So the legend went, while awaiting the new Dragon Lady, any child born into the Lysander family would be offered as a sacrifice to prevent the crown prince from going mad. Even so, Ario knew he would ultimately be responsible. He wondered if he could atone. But perhaps, if she truly was the dragon's child, on the crown prince's 19th birthday, he would offer this child as a sacrifice to save Soylern from the curse. Holding Nive, Ario felt like he must be dreaming, unsure what the memories that had just surfaced meant. Ario found the small, soft life incredibly endearing. He didn't want to do anything that might harm this little girl. With that thought, Ario gently placed Nive back in the cradle. He couldn't stop admiring her chubby cheeks, her slightly disgruntled gaze, even her pouting lips. Ario believed the whole world should know how cute this princess was, and so he believed everyone should bow down to her cuteness. But she still wouldn't smile at all, so he wondered if it was because of what happened last night. Meanwhile, Nive sat quietly in her cradle, watching what Ario would do. He tried playing peekaboo with her again, this time with utmost seriousness, but was met with only unimaginable silence. Ario couldn't understand why the book said doing this would make a baby laugh, while Nive didn't even seem to know what she was looking at. After a moment of thought, Ario concluded that the author of that book must be a liar and needed to be arrested. Sitting in her cradle, Nive wanted to summon that person, where she could use the king's power at will. But Ario, unable to comprehend her thoughts, could only sigh, unsure how to make her laugh. He leaned down and asked Nive what he needed to do to make her smile. Sensing what she wanted, Ario then promised that if she smiled, he would decorate the room beautifully and even assign her a maid. She glanced at Aiden. Although Aiden didn't say anything, her eyes were full of hope, hoping the princess would crack a smile. Nive finally decided to do it for Aiden, but still thought the Soren people were troublesome. Ario reminded her of her past lover, Soren, who had told her that if she smiled, the whole world would bow down to her. Now, seeing his shadow in Ario's face irritated her. Nive then let out a childish babble. She tilted her head back and gave the Emperor a bright smile. Although she was cute even when she wasn't smiling, seeing her smile almost made the Emperor's heart explode. He was completely stunned as the child reacted to him for the first time. Ario felt incredibly fulfilled, noting her smile closely resembled his deceased mother's. So he gifted Nive a toy turtle, a symbol of longevity. Nive accepted it, chewing on it, thinking how ridiculous it was to talk about longevity while she was imprisoned, awaiting sacrifice. Before leaving, the Emperor patted her head, telling her to take good care of it, to be careful, so he wouldn't have to go see Nive's parents. Then the Emperor left her room. But after a few steps, he felt dizzy. He stopped, causing the two attendants to panic. But the Emperor said he just had a slight headache, ordering them to be quiet. Ario realized the madness was starting to take over, hearing a voice in his head telling him to kill, to gnaw, to crush everything. Ario now felt like he was bound in chains by a witch, forced to obey her commands. He was a pitiful sight now, his mind completely consumed by hallucinations. He felt like everyone around him was laughing at him, as if he were a raving lunatic. He accused the attendants of being spies from Rothbrew, leaving them terrified and bewildered. Ario, having lost all reason, told them he had brought them here on purpose. How could they laugh? He wouldn't let the attendants explain the misunderstanding, proclaiming he had confirmed the child's survival and was contemplating sending another assassin. The attendants were immediately surrounded by soldiers with swords drawn. Ario said they had to be sacrificed for him, and to save themselves, they began accusing each other of being spies. In his madness, Ario killed a servant, blood splattering everywhere. He wiped the blood off his face, thinking of Nive, hoping she wouldn't worry, as he would protect her until the very last moment. Meanwhile, back in the room, Aiden and Nive were playing happily. Aiden thought her young mistress was truly extraordinary, proud that Nive already understood everyone and no longer cried. Clearly, the Lysander bloodline was truly powerful. Compared to other noble children, Nive might surpass them all. Aiden believed that while both of them were lively, Nive was the first to display such aptitude at such a young age. She guessed that perhaps Nive's brothers would recognize this immediately. Meanwhile, Nive was chewing on the toy turtle, thinking it was strange to have brothers she had never met. She wondered what her brothers were like. Aiden, assuming the princess was tired, helped her to sleep, and, like any newborn, Nive couldn't resist the drowsiness. Nive had many curiosities, and she drifted off to sleep with them. As she slept, hugging the toy turtle, her two brothers came to see her, standing over her and bickering, each thinking they knew how to care for a baby. But their noise caused Nive to slowly open her eyes to see what was happening. Sheba Lysander was about to tell his younger brother that it was all right if the baby woke up, but before he could finish, he noticed his sister staring at them with wide eyes. The little girl made some cute baby noises, unsure who these people were, but she guessed these two must be her brothers. They were Nathan Lysander and Sheba Lysander. Nive stared at them, realizing how much they looked like her, while her two brothers thought she was incredibly adorable. Nathan asked if she could feel their energy. Sheba, meanwhile, sensed a strong, innate power within Nive. Nive thought he might be sensing the Tarassa energy within her and wanted him to elaborate, but they couldn't understand baby language, assuming she wanted to play. Nathan even thought she might want to call him Appa like Korean children did, so he bragged to Sheba that he'd read some children's books on the ship, and babies this age could already call their older brothers that. With this in mind, Nathan leaned down and prompted Nive to try, saying Appa. Nathan eagerly awaited his little sister calling him Appa, but this wasn't what Nive wanted, so she put on a sad expression. This made Nathan think it was too difficult for her, while Sheba believed she would learn to speak soon since she had inherited the Coral Elf bloodline. Speaking of Coral Elves, they were the strongest fighting race on the sea. They never shied away from battle, possessing an innate and invincible fighting spirit, and their combat talent manifested from a young age. However, they were mostly incredibly beautiful, and humans who wanted to enslave them would hunt them down relentlessly. So they reasoned that their mother's ability to fight off the assassins was due to her Coral Elf bloodline. Sheba said that while mature Coral Elves became the most powerful warriors, they developed slowly within the first year after birth, and he knew those with mixed Coral Elf blood were the same. He speculated that, at this rate, Nive might become even stronger than them, possibly even stronger than their mother. This thought left both brothers staring at their little sister in silent contemplation. But Nathan still found this hard to believe, considering how powerful their mother was. Nathan wondered who had attacked their parents, but even Sheba didn't know. Nathan asked his brother why such a thing would happen, as he couldn't understand. Sheba lowered his head in disappointment, knowing their enemies were countless, and there was even a prophecy that hinted someone must have been desperate enough to take action. Nathan immediately thought of the prophecy that said their sister was the dragon's daughter. Hearing her brothers mention the dragon's daughter, Nive remembered Aiden and the Emperor talking about it too. Nive guessed this must be the prophecy someone had mentioned about her. Nathan had memorized the prophecy long ago, but still didn't understand it. Sheba explained that all 5 priests who performed the ritual at the temple had given the same prophecy. So it must be true. Nive wanted to ask her brothers what the dragon's daughter actually meant. Sheba, seeing her clutching his finger, guessed she must be curious, but of course she couldn't speak. Nathan said to his brother that there was no way she could understand what they were saying, but even Sheba wasn't sure. Sheba then told Nive the content of the prophecy. When the appointed time comes, the rift will open, and after a long sacrifice, the purest power will bloom. The daughter of the sea, after the blessing, the dragon's daughter will finally rest, and Soren will usher in unimaginable prosperity. The wish must be spoken, the path of the blade will be decided. Beg for forgiveness and mercy, but the pain of regret still lingers in the high red land, the land where fear sleeps. It is right to send them back to where they belong, for Lysander is their savior. Young Nive froze, hearing her 2 brothers talk about the curse. If they were talking about the daughter of the sea, then it seemed they were talking about her. Fortuna Laxes was indeed the daughter of the sea. Nive sat in her cradle, looking at her 2 brothers, trying to make sense of it all, especially the end of the long sacrifice Sheba mentioned, which clearly referred to the Lysander family. The purest power was undoubtedly the power of the ocean, and as the daughter of the sea, Nive knew this prophecy must be about her. Nive, Lysander, and the Queen of Atlantis were one and the same. It referred to Tarassa Neptunos Atlantiz. Nive wondered if this prophecy had some connection to her current situation, as if they hadn't known when she would be reborn in Lambesos, the place that worshipped the earth god. It was strange that they would beg for her forgiveness. While she was still deep in thought, Nathan cheerfully picked her up, but she didn't like it at all, clearly showing her displeasure on her face. Nathan was jostling her too much, making her uncomfortable. No matter how Nathan looked, he couldn't see any signs. How could he know she was the Dragon Lord at this moment? By now, Nive was already dizzy, but thankfully Sheba stopped his brother. "Don't handle her so carelessly," he said, taking Nive from Nathan. "When she awakens, she will be the Dragon Lord. If she makes a vow with the Crown Prince, the curse will be lifted, as that is the key to the legend of the Dragon Lord." Nathan started calculating. The Crown Prince was less than 5 years old, meaning there were 14 years until he turned 19. But due to his lack of quick wit, Nathan had to ask his brother if his calculations were correct. He also asked, "What will happen to us if our youngest sister awakens within these 14 years?" Sheba didn't know what to do then. If the curse was lifted, there would be no need for a sacrifice. The thought of sacrificing his sister made Nathan feel incredibly sad. But if his sister truly was the dragon's daughter, it would be a blessing, as he truly hated death. Nathan wondered how someone like that could be born in this era. The Dragon Lord hadn't been born for so long that they had all given up hope. He wanted to thank his little sister profusely and promised they would protect her until then. Nive thought that death must be a terrifying concept for them. After all, they were still just children, and their parents, who had been sacrificed, were no longer around. Of course, Nive felt the same way, but even though she hadn't fully realized it, the memories of connection with her parents still lingered within Nive's body. In her memories, her father doted on her so much, and her mother always protected her. She wondered how the battle had unfolded. Damn it, Nive realized she had unconsciously started crying. Even though she was over 1,000 years old, in this body, she still felt like a child. Seeing his sister turn her head away, Nathan thought it must be time for her nap. He wanted to play with her a little longer, but decided this was enough, promising to bring back some interesting toys tomorrow. After that, Nive's 2 brothers left, leaving her alone in the cradle. She wasn't actually asleep yet and wondered if they would really come back the next day. Regardless, when her brothers were around, she didn't feel lonely. Although deep down she enjoyed this feeling, Nive still felt pained. As she drifted off to sleep, the pain lingered in the darkness, and Nive kept praying for someone to save her. A few days later, Nathan came to see his sister again. He happily showed her the toys he had brought that day, but for a 1,000-year-old girl, these toys felt truly boring. From that day on, her brothers came to see her every day. Meanwhile, she began to babble, and her second oldest brother even gave her the nickname Bobo. Nive held the toy her brother gave her, looked at it, and mumbled a few words no one could understand. In her mind, she still thought she would rather see the ocean than these toys. Seeing his sister in low spirits, Nathan tried to kiss her to make her laugh, but this startled Nive, and she kicked Nathan in the face with her little leg. She thought, why is this octopus-like person touching my precious body? Although Nive was small, her kick still made Nathan clutch his face in pain. Then she gestured for her brother to leave. Witnessing this scene left Nathan utterly astonished. He foolishly assumed she wanted to look out the window, so he carried her over. Nathan wanted to show her how beautiful the ocean was. The moment Nive saw the ocean, she knew that was her home, her beloved place. She reached out through the window, yearning to return. Just like before, swimming with the whales in the sea, she truly missed singing with the mermaids again. The memory of napping on the back of a sea turtle was still so vivid, but would she ever be able to return to those times? She longed to be there, submerged in the water, but Nathan wouldn't let her, saying it was too dangerous. Nive was frustrated. If it were Aiden, she would have let her go out. But Aiden was busy helping prepare for her parents' funeral, and Nive felt powerless in this infant body. Suddenly, she saw Sheba holding a book about the Dragon Lord. Nive eagerly wanted to see the information about the Dragon Lord in that book. She pointed at it, signaling to her brother that she wanted it. Sheba seemed to understand what she meant, and was about to give her the book, but then he pulled it back, withholding it from her. This left Nive incredibly disappointed. A burning frustration welled up inside her. Why would her brother do this? He told her that if she wanted the book, she had to kiss him on the cheek. The request made Nive's head spin. She almost fainted. Apparently, he had read in the book that raising babies required physical contact with their parents to feel loved and build an emotional bond. Since their parents were gone, he had no choice but to play that role. Nathan, too, was eager to do this. Sheba added a condition for Nive. If she didn't like it, he would take the book away. The words, making her the Queen of Atlantis, kiss him on the cheek, felt preposterous. But to get that book about dragons, Nive had no other choice. She thought she wouldn't be able to bear this humiliation. It was a true blow to her dignity as a queen. Nathan, also excited about the dragon book, held it and examined it closely. Nive reluctantly cast aside her pride and quickly pecked his cheek. He froze for a moment, overjoyed, feeling his little sister's kiss on his cheek for the first time. Nive, flustered by the kiss, blushed. Finally, her brother felt the connection between them strengthen. Sheba thought this must be what parental love for a child felt like. He felt his little sister was very smart and could understand what he was saying. Meanwhile, Nive felt incredibly embarrassed, curling her hands, wishing he would stop his nonsense and hand over the book. Once she had the book, she eagerly read about the dragons, just like an adult. As Nive was engrossed in the book, someone quietly sat on the roof, watching her. That person was Theo, sent by His Majesty to secretly escort the young crown princess. His mission was to protect Nive from assassination. As a bodyguard, he knew he couldn't talk to the princess or pretend to know her. However, seeing his master so focused on reading the book, her round cheeks looked even chubbier, and he had to restrain himself from wanting to say hello. He thought her small, cute nose was simply perfect. Her pink hair, streaked with gold, was also very charming. Even Nive's round, small feet were so adorable. All in all, Theo found her cute and charming in every way. But then he snapped back to reality, realizing how strange it was for such a small child to be reading. Seeing Nive flipping through the pages, learning like an adult, made Theo even more curious. Nive, sensing Theo's presence as a bodyguard, figured His Majesty had kept his promise. Therefore, she was no longer afraid of anyone and focused solely on reading the book. She read that the first emperor, Soren, was one of the surviving apostles of the ancient Atlantean Empire. This empire had sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, disappearing along with its glorious culture. Only 2 apostles survived. Empress Soren established a new nation from the records of the Sea Dragon Temple. In return, they had to bear the Sea Dragon's curse. It was the Crown Princess who cured the first emperor's madness. Before passing away, the Crown Princess prophesied that the next Crown Princess would save the Soren royal family. According to the information, the next generation Crown Princess, after her awakening, must establish a covenant with the Crown Prince. Reading this far, Nive wondered what this book was talking about. Had our nation, Atlantis, sunk in the past? Atlantis submerged underwater once every 10 years and then resurfaced. like the boundary between the ocean and land, Atlanteans were familiar with the sea and could breathe even underwater. How could a nation like Atlantis sink and be destroyed? It seemed completely unreasonable, and this curse was strange, as if someone had created and left it behind. Following the predetermined order, the covenant should be completed in the central temple of the Reims Church. However, the marriage could only take place after the crown princess turned 15. Even though the method to break the curse was clearly laid out, Nive couldn't understand the reason behind it. She didn't fully grasp what the sea dragon's curse was. She started to think about the Emperor's madness. It was the pain of every joint, every bone feeling like it was being cut, which was how most people around Nive described it. They would hear the screams and curses of a young girl. Nive stopped reading and closed the book. She felt like she was going mad just from reading a little. It was terrifying. Nive lay down and sighed, wondering if she could hold on until she was 15. She vowed that breaking the curse and running away seemed like the most logical solution. But did she really have to marry the crown prince? She sighed again, not even knowing what the crown prince looked like. She wished she could grow up faster. With these thoughts, Nive slowly drifted off to sleep. Elsewhere, Aiden was thanking the 2 other servants who helped her prepare the funeral. As for the sacrifices, none of the maids received instructions, so they didn't need to worry about that. Aiden quietly opened the door to check on the princess and saw her sleeping soundly. Guessing the young miss must be tired, she signaled the 2 maids to be quiet, telling them to leave after cleaning up. Aiden approached the table, picked up the book, and put it away. She then covered Nive with a thin blanket so she wouldn't catch a cold. At that moment, half asleep, Nive felt someone covering her with a blanket. She guessed Aiden had come in, but she was too sleepy to care and fell back asleep. Just as she drifted off again, the sound of someone crying echoed in her mind, startling her awake. She heard a voice pleading for help. Nive realized she had heard this voice before. She reached out in a daze, unsure what help this person wanted. She wished they would be clear because she was still listening. But on the other side, she could only hear someone crying in pain, feeling as if their body was being torn apart. Nive didn't know how to help that person, so she quickly sat up and threw off the blanket. She followed the sound and found a boy lying there. She felt bewildered, thinking the boy must be experiencing hallucinations and was in immense pain. Nive wasn't sure if what she was seeing was real. When the boy saw Nive, he continued to cry out in pain, as if pleading with her for help. Then he collapsed on the floor, unable to stand up anymore. In her mind, she still heard the boy's voice pleading for help. Nive reached out her small hand, trying to grasp the dark energy surrounding him, but her presence made it disappear. She didn't know what had happened, nor who the boy was. Why was he in so much pain? The next day, as sunlight streamed through the window and into the room, Nive sat alone, still pondering the events of the previous day. What exactly had transpired? She thought the boy might have been hallucinating, or if not, he seemed to be in tremendous pain. She wondered if she would ever see the boy again. Just then, Aiden appeared, reminding her that today was her parents' funeral. Aiden told her the reason for the Duke's attack was still unknown, so they didn't know when danger might appear, and therefore wanted her to dress more safely than usual. Nive, still unable to speak clearly, made a few baby noises, curious about the safe clothes Aiden mentioned. Aiden explained that since they were going to the seaside, it would be windy and she needed to wear a warm coat and choose a dress suitable for a funeral. To protect against assassins, she also needed to wear armor. Aiden even boasted that she herself was wearing armor under her clothes, just like the young miss. As Nive put on her coat, she thought, do maids usually wear armor in preparation for assassinations? She was genuinely curious about Aiden's background. Then Nive thought of her homeland, Atlantis, which always floated on the water. They all came from the sea, so they would return to the ocean after death. But why were the people of Soren doing the same? They were mourning the deaths of the Duke and Duchess. Nive noticed the funeral attire and rituals seemed to have similar customs and traditions. An old man with long white hair and a beard announced that today they had lost the 2 heads of the Lysander family, the protectors of Soren. Fortunately, their children were still here, so the sea god's blessing remained. To prevent such sorrow from happening again, he called for everyone to pray for the fate of the Lysander family. It was time to let the Duke and Duchess depart. The two were placed on a boat decorated with flowers, drifting towards the sea. Their children watched, heartbroken, Nathan and Sheba both crying profusely. They still remembered the promise of traveling together when their parents returned, but now they hadn't kept that promise, and this hurt Nathan deeply. He thought that if he had returned earlier, perhaps he could have saved his parents. Even Nive couldn't escape the grief. Though still a carefree child, she felt the weight of the pain. She thought, I, too, had a father and mother who gave birth to me, raised me, and loved me dearly. It was shocking how quickly everything had crumbled. Nive vowed she would not forgive this and would definitely seek revenge. But to do that, she first needed to become stronger. Nive thought she needed to absorb the ocean's life force as much as possible because she didn't know when it would appear again. However, she noticed the scent of the sea seemed mixed with sand, making her nose itch. Nive sneezed loudly, unable to bear it any longer. But her sneeze triggered a clap of thunder, startling everyone at the funeral. Nive rubbed her nose, thinking this is a disaster because she couldn't control her power. The people at the funeral began whispering, speculating that the thunder was a sign of the gods' anger at the Duke and Duchess's deaths, deeming it an ominous sign. However, Nive could not hear the whispers. The hushed tones irritated her. She wanted to do something to shut them up, so she thought of just cutting their mouths off. But then she remembered Soren, whom she used to adore, telling her that if the Emperor simply smiled, everyone would become her captive. Nive recalled that the Emperor used to love smiling, so she wanted to try it. She nudged a man beside her who was angrily talking about reinforcing the Lysander family. And then Nive gave him a bright smile, thinking to herself, I wish these people would just shut up. Indeed, Nive's mere smile captivated them completely. At the memorial banquet held for the Duke and Duchess, a large crowd gathered. Everyone admired Nive's adorable appearance as she sat in the carriage, though she felt no joy whatsoever. Even the elegant noblewomen exclaimed over how healthy and lovely the little princess was. Nive knew everyone found her cute. One lady wondered aloud whether the Emperor, being so charismatic, would ever have an Empress. Nive, overhearing this snippet of conversation, guessed the lack of an Empress was due to the mania. But the two ladies continued on their way, leaving Nive unable to hear the most crucial part of their conversation. So, she extended her hearing range, catching the remainder of their dialogue throughout the banquet. One of the ladies mentioned the crown prince being too weak to attend, and her friend agreed, saying they should stay a little longer. They worried that the crown prince's temper seemed to be growing more violent. They'd heard that a few days ago, he'd worn blood-soaked gloves, wielding a sword and killing all his servants. Who wouldn't be afraid? They suspected it was all because of the mania. Now, I've also heard them say the crown prince suffered and cried every day. She immediately guessed the boy she encountered yesterday was the crown prince, but the crown prince was only 5, while the boy she met looked about 7. And that boy didn't seem violent enough to kill servants. So, Nive decided she needed to hear the story directly. That voice had been the first to call to her. This time, she wanted to call to it. Nive closed her eyes and focused her thoughts. If you can hear me, answer me. She wanted to ask if he was the crown prince mentioned in the rumors, but Nive only heard a desperate cry for help in response. Nive felt the boy's presence before her again. She still couldn't believe this child was that boy, the boy destined to be her husband. Nive stretched out her small arm, wanting to touch him. Meanwhile, outside, His Majesty the Emperor was being dressed by his servants, preparing to attend the memorial service. His subordinate informed him that the memorial for the Duke and Duchess had begun, so the Emperor wanted to head there immediately. Still concerned about the Crown Prince's condition, he inquired about it and was told the Crown Prince and his Robaro companions had just arrived. The general asked His Majesty if he thought they were behind the assassination of the Duke and Duchess, but Arthur suspected it was more likely the work of another kingdom, one weary of Soren. The Dragon Lord's awakening would bring prosperity to the Empire, so they must be afraid. If that were the case, then the Robaro, the next rulers of the Empire, were the prime suspects. Arya wanted to know how the investigation was progressing. The general reported he had checked all 3 assassin organizations within the Empire, but had found no evidence nowhere. If there were any evidence, the Emperor would behead Crown Prince Robaro today. Now, the emperor wanted them to proceed to the memorial service at once. He wanted to see Robaro's arrogant expression. Elsewhere, the crown prince looked utterly pathetic before Nive. She guessed all the wounds on his face were self-inflicted. Nive couldn't comprehend how much pain he must have been in to hurt himself like that. Suddenly, Nive heard something, guessing it was the sound of a horn. But no, it was a cry for help coming from the boy. Nive reached out, wanting to tell him not to leave. She wanted to plead with him to stay, because there was so much she hadn't said to him yet. So, as she watched him fade away, Nive felt a pang of deep sadness. Just then, His Majesty the Emperor arrived, thanking everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules, commemorating the deaths of Soren's loyal subjects and his important relatives. His Majesty also announced they would soon receive greetings from a guest from afar. Nive, her small face a mask of solemnity despite her tender age, felt a flicker of curiosity about the arriving visitor. So she asked Aiden to lift her. Aiden, ever attuned to the princess's subtle cues, gently scooped Nive into her arms, giving her a better vantage point to observe the unfolding scene. Standing before His Majesty the Emperor was a young boy, Prince Gunther Robaro of Robaro, come to offer his greetings to Emperor Soren. Arthur, his voice heavy with the weight of the recent tragedy, acknowledged the prince's long journey. Gunther, with a practiced air of diplomacy beyond his years, replied that it was an honor to be received. Arthur, his gaze fixed on the boy, finally found the person he'd been searching for. Arthur couldn't discern whether Gunther's presence was a gesture of genuine condolence or a veiled attempt to confirm the deaths of the Duke and Duchess. Nive, too young to grasp the complexities of the political undercurrents, simply clung to Aiden, her small hand gripping the fabric of her dress. Meanwhile, Gunther, a disarming smile playing on his lips, posed a chillingly innocent question to the Emperor. How do you measure the extent of your grief? He reasoned, with the self-assured logic of a child, that he couldn't possibly fathom the profound sorrow of losing one's parents. And so he had come simply to offer a symbolic sharing of the Emperor's burden. Arthur, however, found himself struggling to reconcile Gunther's casual demeanor with the gravity of the occasion, though he grudgingly admitted it was a remarkably composed performance for one so young. Gunther offered his thanks and, with a flourish of calculated ceremony, presented a gift, a token of condolence for the grieving family, an offering for His Majesty to accept. Nive, aware of the long-standing animosity between Robaro and Soren's kingdom, briefly considered the propriety of her remaining present. But the Emperor's earlier words, coupled with the simmering resentment she already harbored towards the Robaro family, fueled a sudden surge of animosity towards Gunther. She suspected the Emperor was grappling with the unsettling possibility that the King of Robaro was somehow implicated in her parents' deaths. The thought solidified into a cold certainty in her young mind. If the King of Robaro was indeed responsible, Nive would never forgive him. Driven by this fierce conviction, she tugged insistently on Aiden's sleeve, her small face set in a determined frown. Diplomatic decorum be damned. She was going to trample Gunther. Aiden, misinterpreting the princess's unusual agitation, assumed she was either hungry or in need of a diaper change. Gunther, his attention drawn by the small commotion, frowned as his gaze settled on Nive. A flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes. This was the child, the one spoken of in the prophecy. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and stood before Nive, their gazes locking in a silent battle of wills. Looking at him, Nive experienced a disconcerting sense of familiarity, a vague echo of recognition that tugged at the edges of her memory. But she couldn't quite place him. Even in Atlantis, those dark, unyielding eyes, they weren't enough. They reminded her of someone who had once answered a question with unwavering certainty. The resemblance was uncanny. A thrill, sharp and electric, coursed through Nive. This was it, her chance. Revenge, so raw and immediate, felt almost within her grasp. How dare he look at her? 1,000 years was too soon. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be approaching her. He should be careful. This small body, despite its apparent innocence, held the echoes of battles fought and won, of a power he couldn't begin to comprehend. Gunther, for his part, was perplexed. He scrutinized Nive, searching for some outward sign of the power she supposedly possessed. But there was nothing. Why would Scylla act like this? Even under his intense scrutiny, she appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary child. His thought remained unfinished. Before he could reconcile the discrepancy between prophecy in reality, Knive's small hand shot out, connecting with his cheek in a resounding slap. The force of the blow, so unexpected from such a small child, sent a jolt of surprise and pain through him. Aiden gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Even His Majesty the Emperor, a man accustomed to maintaining an unflappable composure, stared at the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. He hadn't anticipated such a bold, impulsive act from a child, let alone his own granddaughter. Gunther, stunned and disoriented, sank to the floor, clutching his cheek. Nive, her face a picture of cherubic innocence, maintained her wide-eyed stare, a silent challenge in her gaze. "Don't mess with me." The sting of the slap, both physical and emotional, ignited a furious blush on Gunther's face. "You little beast," he snarled, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "How dare you?" His words were cut short by another swift slap, this one even more forceful than the first. The unexpected blow sent him reeling, his head spinning with confusion and disbelief. Nive, emboldened by her success, let out a delighted giggle. "Stupid boy." Gunther, his fury now incandescent, raised his fist, intent on retaliating. But Nive, quick as a flash, darted behind Aiden, seeking refuge in the folds of her skirts. She cried out, a calculated wail designed to draw everyone's attention, expertly shifting the blame onto Gunther. Aiden, playing her part perfectly, rounded on him with a furious scolding, her voice laced with protective outrage at his supposed threat to a mere infant. Nive, peeking out from behind Aiden's skirts, felt a surge of triumphant glee. "Good girl, Aiden." Gunther, utterly bewildered by the sudden shift in the narrative, stammered his protests, insisting that the child had struck him first. His words, however, were lost in the rising tide of condemnation. The assembled guests, their protective instincts ignited by Nive's carefully orchestrated performance, closed ranks, their voices a chorus of disapproval. How dare he even think of striking a baby? Only Nive, hidden within the safe haven of Aiden's embrace, allowed herself a silent, self-satisfied smirk. "Practice a little more before you come at me, brat." Even Emperor Soren, a man not easily given to displays of emotion, felt a flicker of amusement at the unfolding drama. The sight of the arrogant young prince brought low by a pair of well-aimed slaps was oddly satisfying. General Lysander, his lips twitching with suppressed laughter, remarked on the surprising resonance of the impact. Such a small hand, yet it produced quite the sound. Arthur, his usual somber demeanor momentarily forgotten, chuckled. "Utterly adorable. If I could turn back time, I would watch that moment again." The three men, united in their unexpected amusement, shared a look of shared appreciation for Nive's audacious performance. So innocent, yet so cunning. The general mused that it was the first time he'd seen Arthur smile so genuinely since the Emperor had been slapped himself. Arthur, seemingly aware of his own uncharacteristic levity, sobered slightly. Nive, it seemed, was a potent antidote to his grief. After losing his beloved sister, he had also lost his cherished Cayen and Nive. Now his sole focus was on protecting these two precious remnants of his family. He was the prince left behind by his sister, and Nive was the child left behind by Cayen and Nive. Turning his attention back to the matter at hand, the Emperor inquired about the preparations for bringing the maids to the sacrificial castle. The general assured him that the selection process had been meticulous and that there was no cause for concern. Satisfied, the Emperor then requested a report on any unusual occurrences surrounding the ritual. He wanted to be fully informed. He needed to know what was happening. One of the maids, her voice hushed with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment, informed him that when Nive was in a good mood, she would dance and wiggle her bottom. The news struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He insisted that this vital piece of intelligence be documented immediately and kept strictly confidential. And so, the day drew to a close, the shadows of evening lengthening across the palace walls. Nive, lost in the depths of slumber, dreamt of a time long past, when she was Empress Tessa, nestled between her lover and her dearest friend. Soren, her lover, complained that he couldn't concentrate with such distracting proximity. Tessa, her laughter echoing in the dream, apologized with a radiant smile. Her gaze fell upon his beautiful hands. and she reached out to take them in hers. But Soren, playfully feigning disapproval, insisted that he couldn't simply accept the Empress's apology so easily. Tessa, with a playful roll of her eyes, conceded his point. Only Domi, lying beside them, seemed displeased by their affectionate exchange. As Tessa drifted off to sleep, Soren still holding her hand, he glanced at Domi with a knowing look. Even if those villains changed their ways, Tessa mused, she would still be content with just water. She still couldn't comprehend their betrayal. The pain of it was a sharp, persistent ache in her heart. She wished them all cursed. But even in her dreams, the heartbreak was real. When she awoke, still trapped within Nive's small body, tears streamed down her face. The memory of Atlantis, her homeland, flooded her consciousness. What had become of her kingdom? If this was her fate, then there was only one course of action. She had to gain access to the secret library. But how to achieve this remained a significant obstacle. Nive was, after all, still just a baby, unable to walk. The next morning, she awoke to find herself attended by 3 beautiful maids, Nilla, Baki, and Marin. Nilla, eager to please, presented her with a gift, a baby walker. Nive, her eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration, saw her opportunity. Finally, a means of escape. With a surge of determination, she scrambled into the walker, her sudden movement startling the maids. She had to get out back to the sea. But just as she began to propel herself forward, she heard the boy's voice, a desperate cry for help. "Are you in pain today?" she asked, her gaze drawn to his writhing form on the floor. Nive, her small hand outstretched, willed him to stop hurting. He saw her hand, so small and delicate, hovering before him. He reached out, his fingers grasping for hers. For the first time, it seemed they were able to touch. Nive, desperate to ease the boy's suffering, reached out, her tiny hand trembling with the intensity of her desire to help. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with pain, a flicker of recognition sparking within their depths. Could she be from Atlantis? But before the thought could fully form, Nive found herself somewhere else entirely. Blinded by a sudden, intense sunlight, she blinked, disoriented. She had teleported. The painting, she realized. It had to be the painting. She looked around, her heart pounding. Where was the boy? Panic flared. Had he died? She crawled towards him, her small hand reaching out to check for any sign of life. Relief washed over her as she felt the faintest flutter of a pulse beneath his skin. He was alive, just unconscious. Something protruding from beneath the boy's hair caught her eye. Dragon horns. She recognized them instantly. Could the crown prince have dragon blood? But there was no one around to ask. The boy was ill. That much was clear. Studying his face, Nive realized he didn't look like a 5-year-old at all. He seemed older, somehow. As she continued to gaze at him, a strange feeling stirred within her. He was beautiful. Such perfect features, such captivating eyes, nose, and mouth. Of course, her brothers were handsome, but this boy, he possessed something more, something enthralling. This, Nive thought with a surprising certainty, is my ideal type. A face like that deserved to be protected. Suddenly, she noticed the cloth on his forehead had slipped. Driven by an inexplicable urge to care for him, she reached out and gently adjusted it, smoothing it back into place. As her fingers brushed his skin, the crown prince stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. He blinked, his gaze locking on Nive's. Surprise flickered across his features. Nive, undeterred by his wary expression, saw him not as a prince, but as a wounded seal pup in need of comfort. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice surprisingly firm for a baby. The crown prince, clearly bewildered, stared at her. Where had this baby come from? He tried to sit up to make sense of the situation, but Nive, her anxiety spiking, frantically urged him to stay still. Was he delirious? Suddenly, a passage from a book flashed through her mind. There is no other way than the oath. The appointment letter. The crown prince's madness could be alleviated by the oath's location, but how could she get close to him when he was so ill? As she wrestled with this dilemma, the crown prince reached out and gently stroked her hair. Nive froze, startled by the unexpected contact. Then, to her surprise, he pulled her close, hugging her tightly against his stomach. She gasped, momentarily winded. Seizing the opportunity, she took a deep breath and, channeling the power of the ocean, blew a gentle stream of air around him, hoping to ease his suffering. Her cheeks puffed out with the effort, making her look even more cherubic. After a moment, the crown prince's eyes fluttered open again. He stared at her, a flicker of awareness in his gaze. Nive, relieved, stopped blowing. But as soon as she did, his eyes closed once more, and he drifted back into unconsciousness. Why hadn't he called for help? Nive wondered. Could she sense his inner turmoil? Despite his stubbornness, she found herself wanting to hold him close, to protect him for whatever was causing him such pain. The next day, Nive awoke from a dream, still nestled against the Crown Prince. As she blinked sleepily, he greeted her. Nive recognized the familiar scent that clung to him, the scent of the ocean. She couldn't believe how powerful he was, even at such a young age. A power akin to her own in her past life. But unlike her, it felt as though the entire ocean despised him. Compelled by an irresistible curiosity, she reached out, wanting to understand the source of this hidden power. He sat patiently, allowing her to examine him. He must be feeling better, she surmised. The Crown Prince, marveling at the sense of calm that washed over him in her presence, the easing of his pain, looked at her with wonder. "Are you the legendary daughter of the dragon?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nive, unsure how to respond, gave a non-committal hum. "Do you remember yesterday's discussion about the title?" he continued. As Nive grew, her status would strengthen. "Thank you," he murmured. "Because of you, I can breathe easier." But seeing her unhappy expression, he assumed she must be hungry. "Would you like some milk?" he offered. Nive, however, had other things on her mind. Milk was far too bland. She craved a juicy steak, or perhaps some buttery shrimp. The Crown Prince, assuming he'd guessed correctly, chuckled and apologized to Nive, indicating he understood. He seemed to think she wanted baby food. Nive's eyes widened. Could he actually hear her thoughts? He told her that if she thought strongly enough, her words could reach him. Nive found this astonishing. The Crown Prince promptly summoned a servant. The servant entered, startled to see Nive there, and wondered how she'd arrived. The Crown Prince ordered him to bring his own meal, along with food for Nive. The servant, understanding his orders, hurried off to fetch the food. The Crown Prince turned back to Nive, smiling, curious about her name. He considered summoning someone who might know her. Nive hesitated, thinking she could only tell him her name. But the Crown Prince said that wouldn't do, leaving her looking up at him in confusion. He declared he didn't want to be separated from her for even a moment, unsure what to do. Nive wished he would stop. He couldn't possibly take care of her. As for her name, she could tell him that much. She was Nive. The Crown Prince said it was a pleasure to meet her and introduced himself as Cayen. Nive, however, still doubted he was truly 5 years old. Looking closely, she noticed how beautiful his eyes were. He didn't look much like an emperor. Cayen suddenly laughed, confirming he was indeed 5, startling Nive, who realized he'd heard her thoughts again. Embarrassed, she covered her face. Cayen had heard her thoughts. He noted her expression seemed to suggest that royalty matured faster than commoners. He boasted to Nive that he was the emperor's son, and that his mother was currently his majesty's sister. Nive realized that was how the family relations currently stood. She was also puzzled by the way Cayen kept staring at her. He explained it was because she was so cute. Cayen knew Nive was aware of the people around them, but couldn't express herself. He recognized that the little one was melting everyone's hearts with her cuteness. Nive thought that, with Cayen, even marriage might be a possibility. She pictured the blissful scene of tossing the bouquet at her wedding with Cayen when they were older. Curse or not, she could handle it. They could always get divorced later. But the thought of leaving Cayen alone made her sad. She reached out her small hand and touched Cayen's cheek. Just then, Nathan and Aiden rushed in, looking frantic. Seeing Nive safe and sound, they finally relaxed. Nathan was overjoyed to find his sister, but the sight of the Crown Prince beside her renewed his panic. Aiden noticed a servant bringing them food. The Crown Prince glared at the maid, thinking he'd never ordered her to bring food, and that obstacle. The maid trembled, kneeling, explaining she was only delivering food, begging for his forgiveness. Nive thought this was terribly harsh. She wished someone would hurry up and set the food out. The aroma of beef wafting from the tray made her mouth water. She was ravenous. Unable to convey her thoughts to everyone, Nive tried to indicate they should give her the food and not hurt anyone. Nathan, thinking his sister was unwell, rushed to her side. But Nive was trying to say the person delivering the meal was a good person. As if reading her mind, the Crown Prince ordered the maid to leave. She bowed her thanks to the princess. Nive, staring at the meal, was intensely hungry. Cayen happily began feeding her with a spoon. Nive thought the food was absolutely delicious. Cayen asked if it was good, and Nive gestured for another bite. As they enjoyed the baby meal, Nathan addressed the prince. He said that after she finished the baby food, he would take Nive back, as their family was extremely worried. Nive thought this was reasonable. They must have been frantic after her sudden disappearance. But she was reluctant to leave Cayen now. The crown prince refused Nathan's request, stating that compared to being a sacrifice, Nive seemed to prefer being with him. Then, he turned to her and asked if that was true. Nive thought that despite Cayen's outward appearance, he had been enduring a great deal of suffering alone. In truth, he had been constantly striving to overcome his pain, and she understood the need for self-reliance. Cayen promised Nive he would give her everything she desired, every single day, and so he wished for her to stay by his side. Nive truly wanted to apologize to her brother, but she couldn't leave this boy alone, no matter what. And so, Nive remained with the crown prince. The servants began to gossip, whispering that the two of them couldn't possibly stay together like this. Nive wondered why Cayen, who could hear everything, remained silent. The servants, worried the crown prince might harm the princess, believing she was meant to be today's sacrifice. Hearing this, Cayen stopped in his tracks. Nive thought these people gossiped far too much, especially knowing the boy could hear every word. The crown prince summoned Joseph and issued a command, 30 lashes, and then dismissal. The servant panicked, begging the crown prince for forgiveness, admitting his wrongdoing and pleading for his life. But Cayen ignored him, walking away with Nive in his arms. The servant assumed the crown prince's madness had flared up again. Later, Cayen and Nive departed in a carriage. The crown prince sadly asked if she thought he'd been too harsh, but Nive disagreed, believing the servant deserved his punishment. Cayen mused that if the gossip had been directed solely at him, he would have let it slide. But since Nive had been dragged into such trivial matters, he couldn't forgive it. Nive patted his back, praising him for doing well. Such dereliction of duty deserved punishment. Cayen turned to Nive, telling her she was truly amazing. He couldn't understand how she, a mere newborn, felt as mature as he was. Did she have some secret he didn't know? Nive wondered how surprised Cayen would be if he knew her true identity as Tessa. She asked him if he sensed anything unusual about her. Cayen attributed it to her being a Lysander. The answer, different from what Nive expected, still surprised her. Then, Cayen took Nive's tiny hand and kissed it. Nive was quite startled by the kiss, a little shy, but she liked it. Cayen wanted to thank her for not being afraid of him. He wished she would grow up quickly so they could talk. But suddenly, Nive noticed something was wrong with Cayen. She didn't know what was happening. His breathing grew ragged, his body slowly turning cold. Cayen, in great discomfort, still managed to call out Nive's name as a warning. He told her it might be dangerous, so she shouldn't move. He wanted to continue speaking to her, but couldn't say more. Cayen seemed to transform into a completely different person. Nive realized he couldn't control his actions, left only with the instinct to attack. She knew this happened when absorbing another's power. At this moment, Cayen's body was rejecting the dragon's power. She understood that this power hadn't yet been accepted by his body, causing it to constantly surge forth. However, in Atlantis, absorbing another's power was a capital offense. Cayen had killed someone at that age, so there was no justification for stripping him of his power. Therefore, Nive immediately thought of Cayen. She didn't know what he had done. She glanced over, seeing Cayen was still in immense discomfort. With all her might, she willed Cayen to wake up. She wanted to rouse him, to have him try to resonate with her again. Nive felt the energy was cyclical, everything here in harmony. Finally, he awoke, and Nive was overjoyed. But upon waking, Cayen was utterly astonished. He wanted to know if Nive was all right. Cayen thanked God, as he'd been terrified she would be hurt because of him. Nive guessed he knew about her condition. Cayen honestly told the princess he had lost his mind. He had blacked out, and if anyone tried to stop him, he would have attacked them. He also thanked Nive for staying still as he'd asked, though in reality, she hadn't stayed still at all. Nive wondered if this was why Cayen was always alone, assuming the servants would have tried to restrain him. She thought of the royal secret library, wanting to understand what magic Cayen had used after gaining his power. It was like a spell passed down through generations, a forbidden incantation that should never be cast. Nive thought that if she had recognized Cayen and Domi's betrayal sooner, perhaps Cayen wouldn't have to suffer like this. Just then, someone announced the prince's arrival. Cayen wanted to take Nive with him, and she agreed. So, Cayen carried the little princess to meet His Majesty the Emperor. Nive obediently followed Cayen's lead, offering no resistance. She didn't know where Cayen was taking her, as the place felt strange. But when Nive saw something, her eyes widened in surprise. Cayen had brought her to Tessa's statue, and she recognized it as her former self. Seeing Tessa in that form, Nive was speechless. She confirmed that it was indeed her, the Empress of Atlantis. Cayen mentioned there would be many noisy people inside, so he warned her in advance not to be startled. Then the doors opened, and Cayen carried Nive inside. She wondered who had placed the majestic Emperor's face in the middle of the door. There were many people inside, and they displayed various emotions upon seeing the Emperor. Ario asked the Emperor what was happening. As Cayen entered, carrying Nive, he overheard some murmurs about Princess Nive. Cayen immediately bowed to the Emperor, who was surprised to see them together. Cayen said he had something to discuss with him, but even Nive didn't know what he meant. It turned out he wanted to talk about resonating with Princess Nive. Everyone inside was utterly astonished by this. They began to approach, wanting a closer look at Princess Nive. Even His Majesty was surprised, inquiring about the prince's condition. Others noted that there weren't any visible changes in the princess's body. The Emperor understood this meant neither of their physical states had changed after the resonance. Therefore, becoming a sacrifice like snowflakes could have varying outcomes. Even Nathan and Hebo wanted to know more. Hebo addressed His Majesty, saying that even if Nive was the Dragon Queen, the Lysanders, in addition to themselves, were also creating such a place. Hebo wondered if he could formally object to the prince. The people present were also closely following the unfolding story. Meanwhile, Nive thought that both of her brothers were there. It seemed they had already informed him about what had happened to Cayen, but she noticed their attitude towards His Majesty. The Emperor, regardless of how they addressed the Lysanders, was struggling to survive. She thought that in front of the Emperor and the prince, if they looked at them with that attitude, her brothers might get into trouble. Nathan felt his little sister, Popo, wanted to say something to her two brothers, but he couldn't understand. Nive tried to convey that she was all right. The two turned to look at each other, sharing the same thought, unsure what their sister was thinking. Then they bowed their heads and apologized to His Majesty for their rudeness. Despite their acknowledgement, Hebo believed that since Nive was a Lysander, they should be with His Highness. They wanted to ensure they didn't miss anything that might happen when the resonance with Nive was announced. So, Hebo thought they should understand the Lysanders first. Therefore, in the future, before organizing such occasions, they hoped His Highness would inform them beforehand. Hearing this suggestion, Cayen didn't seem pleased. Meanwhile, Nive realized it was about escaping the sacrificial location. It wasn't strange that Hebo and Nathan needed to know this. She thought her brothers were right this time. His Majesty the Emperor agreed that this was the situation. The problem was that Dim wasn't prepared, so he would consider the matter later. Furthermore, as today was a special day, he hoped they could overlook the incident. Ario wanted to formally congratulate them on escaping the sacrificial location. This included Hebo and Nathan, and of course Nive. The two bowed their heads in thanks to His Majesty and wanted to ask a few more questions. Hebo inquired about the Dragon Queen's life force, specifically whether it would disappear. He reasoned that the original sacrificial offering's sea dragon power couldn't have existed to prevent His Highness's escape. Therefore, even after the resonance strengthened and the curse lifted through the oath, if the Dragon Queen disappeared from the human vessel again, wouldn't escaping be dangerous? The Crown Prince couldn't answer this question and simply lowered his head in silence. Nive was relieved to hear she might not need to be the Dragon Queen anymore. However, she didn't intend to spend her life with Cayen even if his condition improved. She thought she could travel and enjoy freedom. Someone suggested they should begin the resonance process now, and even if it wasn't possible, they should observe for 3 months. Ario asked if 3 months were truly necessary to make a judgment. The person confirmed it was true, as there weren't many records regarding the first Dragon Queen. His Majesty understood the implication that curing the madness was difficult, but the person believed they needed to conduct more research on the current Dragon Queen. Hearing about the secret library, Nive rushed forward, as if wanting to tell everyone to let her into the secret library as well. As if reading Nive's mind, Cayen told her not to worry. But instead of addressing her desire for the library, he assured her he wouldn't harm her. Cayen told her he understood the meaning of illness very well. He wasn't trying to upset her, so she shouldn't be afraid. Nive felt that from the beginning, no one in this world could harm her, and now she only wanted to go to the secret library. The Crown Prince insisted he already understood, but she wondered, what did he understand, exactly? Nive thought that there wasn't even a drop of water in this room. If there were, she would use the water to write to Cayen so he could see. Nive wondered when she would finally grow up in this place. She truly looked forward to that day. His Majesty decided to change Nive's residence starting today. She was curious where she would be living. The Emperor said it was a palace prepared long ago for the Dragon Queen. He walked over and patted Nive's head, believing it would instantly delight her. The next day, Nive was taken to a magnificent and truly vast palace. She thought it was amazing, truly unbelievable. Aiden said this was Mrs. Bedroom, and the maids also thought it was incredibly beautiful. Nive felt good. At least it was a bedroom befitting an empress. They discovered her wardrobe was filled with lovely clothes, even baby shoes. They wanted to dress her quickly. Nive was dumbfounded. She hadn't expected such a large dressing room. 3 maids each picked out a beautiful dress for her, hoping she would choose that one. Just then, seeing someone appear, Polka was startled and slipped. It turned out to be Nathan and Hebo who had opened the door. They wondered what was making such a loud noise. Everyone bowed their heads to greet the 2 arriving dukes. Nathan was delighted to see his little sister Nive, who excitedly waved to greet her brother. He proudly presented her with a small gift, a sparkling jade bracelet, which he believed must have belonged to their mother. Nive realized it was the behemoth's lucky stone, truly rare, and she wondered how it had come into her possession. Aiden seemed to recognize the bracelet and looked flustered. Nathan asked her what was wrong. She explained that she and Nive had lost the bracelet the day they escaped, but she didn't understand how it ended up here. The Lysander siblings were puzzled by Aiden's words and wanted her to explain further. Aiden told them that on the day she and the princess escaped, Master Nini had placed a bracelet on Mrs. wrist. However, a stranger had attacked them, and Aiden hadn't had much time to pay attention to the bracelet as she was busy escaping. She guessed the bracelet might have slipped off the princess's wrist while leaving the villa, but Aiden couldn't go back there. Hearing this story, Nive began to think. Amidst the chaos, she wondered how Aiden had escaped unharmed. It turned out to be because of the Lucky Stone's power. The moment they left the villa, Nive remembered the bracelet slipping from her wrist. Outside, escape from their pursuers seemed impossible. Fortunately, she regained consciousness in time, but Nathan told Aiden it had fallen in front of the fireplace, which turned out to be a secret passage. Nathan stepped forward and placed the bracelet on Nive's wrist. She could only sit quietly in Aiden's lap and let her brother fasten the bracelet. She guessed her mother must have had a bad premonition that day, which was why she had given her the bracelet. Suddenly, Nive was startled by the sound of something shattering. It turned out to be the clumsy maid, Poku, who had broken another bowl. She hurriedly apologized for her carelessness. Nive patted her forehead, exasperated with the maid. Hebo remembered something he hadn't mentioned yet. He patted his sister's head, thinking she was destined to be the dragon's child, so he was planning a celebratory party. The original owner of the palace should have hosted this banquet, but since Nive was still too young, her brother would organize it for her. Nive was delighted. She had never organized a party before, as Caitlin used to do everything. Hebo told her the date of the celebration was 2 weeks later. He then turned to leave, but Nathan insisted on playing with Bobo a little longer. He boasted that Hebo had commissioned a precious wardrobe as a gift for Bobo. Nive thought if it was that extravagant, he must have ordered it immediately after seeing her. She felt Hebo was smiling, as if to say he was even more thoughtful than the Emperor himself. Nathan bragged to Nive that the gems on the wardrobe were purchased by the 2 brothers together, including the treasures they obtained after defeating the pirates. But now he really had to leave. Nive wanted to live in the palace with her too, but they had escaped this sacrificial location, so they would be staying at the Douglason house. Nive reached out and patted her brother's head, wanted to tell Nathan to hurry up because Hebo was waiting, but he misunderstood, thinking Bobo also wanted to be with him. He then patted Nive's forehead, saying he understood the feeling. He really wanted to be with his sister too. Afterward, he kissed Nive's hair, saying goodbye until next time. Nathan waved goodbye to Nive, smiling and promising to visit often. Because of the kiss, Nive still didn't quite feel like smiling. Only Aiden cheerfully greeted the Duke. Nive wondered how the party would go. She had no idea what would happen there. 2 weeks later, on the day of the party, the three maids were all delighted as they looked at their Mississippi. They thought she was truly adorable, the cutest in the world. They felt they could barely contain their excitement. The three were truly disappointed because only one maid was allowed into the banquet hall, and of course, Aiden would be that person. They resolved to memorize how adorable the crown prince was. Afterward, Nive waved goodbye to the three maids and went to the banquet with Aiden. Aiden carried the princess out of the castle, music echoing all around, as if welcoming her. Suddenly, Aiden noticed someone above and informed the princess. It was Crown Prince Cayen, looking dashing in his military uniform, waiting for Nive. Cayen was delighted to see Nive arrive. Captivated by his gaze, she thought to herself how much more handsome he looked today. Aiden curtsied, greeting his highness. Upon seeing Cayen, Nive immediately wanted to go to him. He told her that thanks to her, he felt much better today. Cayen felt his condition noticeably improve every time he saw Nive. Nive thought this was only natural, as she had been by his side for 2 weeks. Cayen warned the princess that she might encounter many troublesome people here, especially nobles who disliked them. The nobles didn't want royal power. They wanted the aristocracy's influence to grow stronger. Therefore, they might blindly hate the two of them. Nive thought they were deeply entrenched in their ways. Despite this, she wanted the prince not to worry. Her small body wasn't afraid of anyone. Cayen found Nive incredibly cute. He no longer knew what words to use to describe her. However, he wouldn't do anything rash, as he wouldn't engage in a fight. Only Nive was always ready for battle. Cayen believed that since they were together today, it shouldn't be too difficult to handle. But he still worried about what would happen if they crossed the line. In that case, he absolutely wouldn't let them off easily, so Nive needn't worry. Then, Cayen carried Nive into the room to join the party. He told her they should go in and see what was inside. The nobles were dressed in their finery for the banquet. As soon as they saw the two of them, they recognized the crown prince and the dragon's daughter. So, Cayen, holding Nive, entered with Aiden under the scrutinizing gazes of the nobles. Many found Nive adorable. They knew she was the legendary dragon's royal daughter. Another person, eagerly awaiting her arrival, felt the dragon's daughter wasn't that remarkable after seeing her. Hearing these words, Nive just wanted to make those people shut up. She would definitely remember their faces. Seeing her unease, Aiden wasn't sure what was wrong with the princess, while Cayen immediately guessed that Nive was uncomfortable. Now, everyone's attention was focused on the two of them. Aiden suggested to the prince that she look after Nive for the time being. She told the prince that if Nive felt unwell, she would let her use a walker. Nive thought this was perfect, just as she had hoped. Aiden was indeed a thoughtful maid. She thought that perhaps using the walker would give her a chance to get into the secret library, and then find the information she wanted. Cayen cheerfully reminded Nive to be careful and not to fall, but Nive knew it was impossible to fall while using a walker. She wanted to go over and kick those annoying nobles. The nobles chatted amongst themselves, thinking Nive was just a child, questioning what power she had to lessen their frenzy. One man laughed loudly, saying that even so, Nive was quite cute, and when she grew up, he would only care about her looks. Wineglass in hand, he commented on Duchess Lester's unattractive face, at which point Nive used her power to splash the wine in his face. The noble assumed someone next to him had accidentally spilled champagne on him. Meanwhile, Nive snickered. They shouldn't insult her mother like that. They were like electric eels. She felt there was nothing interesting left at the banquet, so Nive wanted to escape for a while. She wondered if she could do it. With that thought, Nive sat in her walker and quietly slipped away, unnoticed. She wheeled herself out of the room. Then she noticed something on the other side. Nive guessed there might be something interesting there. Her intuition told her so. So, following her intuition, she sought out this intriguing something, excitedly preparing to use her powers to open the door. Just as she was about to casually step outside, Nive heard someone yell for quiet, startled by the sound of the opening door. Nive raised her small hand and offered a bright, beaming smile in greeting, much to his surprise. Looking at the insignia on his chest, Nive realized he was a high-ranking mage. He, too, guessed that Nive was the dragon's daughter, and her reaction seemed to confirm it. The mage stood there, at a loss for what to do with Nive. She, however, noticed something before her, a messy pile of papers scattered across a table, covered in strange diagrams. Nive went over and picked them up for a closer look, discovering they were written in the sea giant language. It was an exercise on ancient Atlantean magic. The mage was utterly astonished by Nive's actions, exclaiming how could she possibly be focused on studying at a party? This was no joke. Nive, completely engrossed, examined the papers, realizing they were all wrong. She picked up each one, scrutinizing them carefully, confirming that indeed they were all incorrect. She gestured to the mage, indicating the answer should be the third one. He leaned in, surprised, asking Nive if she was giving him the answer with her fingers. The mage had to widen his eyes to check if it was real. He was so shocked he nearly fainted. How could a child communicate and solve problems, let alone read the sea giant language? The mage was convinced this was no ordinary intelligence. He took Nive's hand, introducing himself as Salacloth, and implored her to take him as her disciple. Holding both of Nive's hands, Salacloth begged her to teach him, promising to treat her well as he would a master. Nive almost forgot that mages were all eccentric. How could they take a child as their teacher? However, she saw this as an opportunity to prove her genius while concealing her powers. If they saw her intelligence, the assassination threats would lessen, and she could also request access to the secret library. Salacloth was still waiting for her response on whether she would accept him as her disciple. Nive, still unable to speak, thought she should cry loudly first, then call for someone. With that thought, Nive burst into tears, loud enough for those far away to hear. Salacloth was extremely panicked, not understanding why the crown princess was crying like this. Hearing Nive's cries, 3 men rushed in, demanding to know who made the child cry. Even Nive was sweating, wondering if these people had their ears pressed against the door. They arrived so quickly. So, Salacloth received a headbutt for making their little sister cry. Hebo told Salacloth not to speak of this to anyone, and Nathan seconded it. Even while being held by the prince, Nive continued to wriggle. This led Cayen to believe she wanted water, as she was different from others. Before he could say anything, Salacloth quickly brought the princess some water to drink. Nive wanted to reach out and excitedly touch the glass with her finger. In an instant, the water in the glass Salacloth held was as if pulled by a powerful force, splashing everywhere. The 4 young men, witnessing Nive's ability, were stunned. Salacloth realized the flowing water was a form of casting magic. Nive, delighted, pointed her index finger towards the sky, controlling the water as she pleased. She was casting a spell, thinking she needed to show everyone her abilities. After that incident, the king, holding Nive, went inside with the other 2 and sat at the table. Nive had originally only intended to communicate with the Tower Master through secret letters. That woman was Alosha, the master of Elta. Nive wondered why there were so many people. The silver-haired old man was the grand sage, Jintsut. Salacloth told them that Nive was indeed a genius. He described how she used the ancient language to cast high-level magic in one go, achieving a perfect score. Alosha asked Salacloth if he could take responsibility for his words, but he swore to her, willing to bet his high-ranking mage certificate. Alosha then produced a scroll from her hand, covered in writing, thinking that perhaps people would be able to read it in the future. Nive recognized it as a sea giant cookbook. She thought it did indeed look difficult to read, but Nive, using her hand, controlled a plate of water in front of her. Even Jintsut had to admit it was a special ability. Then she used the water to write letters for everyone to understand. Nive wondered what would happen if they realized she could read it. Both Jintsut and Alosha were surprised to recognize it as the sea giant language. Jintsut couldn't comprehend how a little girl could use that language. Meanwhile, Alosha was puzzled as to how Nive knew magic. Nive fell in a deep thought, unsure of what to say. To help them understand, she instinctively used magic to write, indicating that she had known how to do this with water since birth. His Majesty the Emperor thought that since she was Lysander's daughter, it made sense, unlike her 2 brothers. Ario felt there were indeed more talented geniuses in this world. He wondered if, at that moment, if they couldn't understand more, whether the crown princess needed to downplay her talents. Therefore, Ario wanted this matter kept secret. Even if she was a gifted child, he didn't want her happiness taken away. Jintsut laughed joyfully, thinking that if he wanted to interact with the crown princess when she grew up, he had to live longer. Alosha also hoped to live longer than that old man if she wanted to develop magic with the crown princess. Meanwhile, Nive didn't understand how she had become their child. She wrote with magic that she wanted to enter the secret library. If she could get in there, she might find important information. They told her that was true, but she couldn't go inside. Nive was very surprised, not understanding why she couldn't enter. The Emperor explained that if that room were opened, even other kingdoms would know its secrets, which would put her in even greater danger. Hearing this, Nive was angry. Did this mean she was never allowed in? The two elders were busy praising the princess, their hearts melting. Alosha mentioned that in 10 years, she could help someone practice ancient magic from the tower. Jinsut said that in 10 years, he could study ancient languages and history with other sages. They would leave everything entirely to His Majesty. The Emperor found this amusing and smiled slightly. Alosha boasted that she had seen His Majesty bring food out of the secret library, implying the crown princess might have seen it in the study. She uncertainly asked the Emperor if this was true. Jinsut confirmed it, thinking it wasn't strange for a child to see that room. Even the Emperor wondered if that was true. Nive raised both hands, indicating it was indeed so. The Emperor then wanted Nive to express her desire to enter the secret library to show him. She wrote with magic that she wanted to see the records about the first Emperor, or the documents about the decline of Atlantis, if there was even a little bit she could know about what happened. Knowing the little princess's wish, the Emperor seemed to hesitate in thought. He called for Cayen. Nive turned expectantly towards the doorway. Hearing the call, Cayen entered the room, making his appearance. Nive was surprised to see Cayen there as well. Ario asked Cayen if he had heard everything, and the boy replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." Ario thought that privately, the boy should call him uncle. After all, this had to be his private space. Cayen happily agreed to address him as the Emperor commanded. He sat down and asked what his uncle would gain from the Tower Master and that sage. The Emperor said he wasn't clear about the current situation. He didn't know what Raboro would do, but one day it might attack them, so they should declare war now. After all, he needed a way to preemptively strike against Raboro. However, if that happened, the lives of the people would become worse. Therefore, they would strengthen their forces when necessary. Nive realized the mage and the sage would have to fight in the coming war. She thought the Emperor wanted to protect the people in this way. However, Ario said his manic state was getting worse. He would try to endure it, but he didn't know where his limit was. Cayen sadly urged his uncle not to say such things. Nive didn't know what it felt like to be in a manic state, though she had only read about it, but she felt pained. She truly couldn't imagine how painful the reality would be. Despite this, the Emperor endured it for the sake of his grandson, who was still young. Nive thought she couldn't interfere between the two of them. Even as a descendant of Gordon, seeing them suffer wouldn't comfort her. She couldn't resolve this problem with her little girl's body, so she could only wait for time to pass. As time passed, it became noticeably slow. During that time, she slept a lot. Finally, Nive turned 1 year old, and now she had grown a lot bigger. Nive personally burned the invitations, throwing them into the fire. She wondered if the Tower Master and the Grand Sage never got tired of writing so many letters to her. Since Aiden saw Nive emerge from the fire, he had been worried about finding the young miss, but she assured him she knew. Then Aiden wanted to hold Nive for a while. Holding the young miss, he happily asked what they would play today. Nive said she wanted to play roll around, but Aiden thought the Crown Princess had already rolled around in bed yesterday. Then Nive raised her hand, telling the maid she wanted that. Aiden didn't know what his young miss wanted, and stood there puzzled for a moment. Finally realizing what Nive wanted, she got it for her. However, Nive noticed the paper was crumpled, and she wondered if she should rewrite it. It was a manuscript about the fall of ancient Atlantis, and she had read it so many times that it had become wrinkled. An unprecedented tsunami engulfed the land. The ocean, like a giant monster filled with rage, quickly submerged all prosperity. Originally, when entering the underwater era, the water would quietly surround the land, but Nive wondered what it would have been like if there had been a wave as tall as the castle. Even though she had memorized it, Nive still couldn't imagine or understand what was written about Emperor Gordon's regrets. She didn't think it was very important, so she gave up on it. The important content must be at the front. The next chapter continued to talk about Emperor Gordon's regrets, and she could still feel the emotion when reading that part. It was a feeling of anger and despair. She wanted to read it again to absorb every story, but it didn't continue, only leaving off with a cliffhanger as if the ending was open-ended. Nive pouted and lay on her pillow, not understanding why it stopped without continuing. She lay there sighing, pondering the unpleasant part after that, which recorded Gordon's actions after the fall of Atlantis. The Atlanteans had to survive on land, searching for refuge. Gordon founded a religion, and Nive believed Atlantis would exist forever. She didn't know what that religion was now. In Gordon, there was only one religion now, Ramit, the god of the land. Back then, he sealed calm and then declared that Atlantis would exist forever. But Nive thought that she was Atlantis and Atlantis was her. The more Nive thought about it, the more her head hurt, and she threw the papers away, not wanting to continue thinking. Seeing Nive react that way, Aiden ran over to check if she was okay, saying he would bring her some juice. Nive thought Aiden worked hard for her every day. As she was thinking, she heard something, and Nive guessed Aiden had returned. It turned out to be Hebo, who said Nive was lazy. He thought she was still living sluggishly today. Nive didn't know whether to take that as a compliment or an insult. She looked at her brother with a blank expression and asked him why he was here. Wasn't he busy? Even though he had indeed become a duke, he came to see her every day. He sat down and said he was Hebo. Yes, he was busy, but he'd looked in a parenting book and found that this was the most crucial period of development. Therefore, he brought the crown princess something to play with, which would help raise her sensitivity index. Nive didn't know how to play with it. Seeing her brother holding the historical documents about Atlantis, Nive became very anxious. She smiled, thinking of an idea to hide it. Nive immediately put her hand into the paints Nathan had given her. He didn't have time to comprehend what was happening. Nive happily smeared her paint-covered hand across her brother's cheek. Seeing this, Nive burst into laughter, but Nathan didn't appreciate the childish prank. Just then, Aiden came in with a glass of fruit and, seeing the scene, wanted to laugh but didn't dare. Aiden turned to Nive and smiled, knowing she was playing with watercolors, and he wanted to clean her hands. He then handed the crown princess a glass of juice to drink first. Nive took a long sip, enjoying the sweet, warm taste. She realized it was hot chocolate. As Hebo enjoyed his drink, Nive suddenly laughed. He didn't understand why she was laughing, so Nive pointed at the cup of chocolate in his hand. Nathan then asked what was unusual about drinking chocolate. Nive thought he seemed like a sweets addict. It was her preference, but it didn't suit her. Even Nathan found it amazing that Hebo, who didn't like sweets, was drinking it. Hebo, feeling annoyed today, asked Nive what she wanted, and he would get her something. If it was something she wanted. Nive wanted information about the fall of Atlantis or the first emperor, but it seemed Hebo didn't know. Suddenly she thought of something she was still curious about. Nive was very curious about what the previous emperor was like. There were no records of the previous emperor's actions, but surely Hebo would know. Seeing Aiden's surprised look, Nive thought she might have said something she shouldn't have. Therefore, the girl was worried, unsure she had said something wrong. Suddenly, Aiden told her he wanted to change her clothes, which greatly surprised Nive. It turned out her dress had gotten dirty without her realizing it. Since others couldn't see the crown princess changing, Aiden covered her with a wooden frame. However, Hebo didn't notice this and continued sipping his drink while holding a piece of paper. Nive guessed she had indeed done something wrong, but she wasn't sure what. Aiden brought new clothes, but her expression seemed a little sad. She told the princess about the deceased emperor, saying it was best not to mention him, as it was a painful memory for all of them. Nive thought it wasn't just for the current emperor and Cayen, but also for Hebo and Aiden. Aiden told her that her mother, Lady Nini, was like a sister to the deceased emperor, which was why she stopped eating and drinking after that incident. Aiden even cried, saying the deceased emperor's incident was a blow, but seeing Lady Nini like that was hard for her to accept. And those nobles, Nive understood, so Nathan and Aiden's expressions weren't good. Because Nive didn't know, she thanked Aiden for telling her. Speaking of this reminded Aiden of something Lady Nini always said, and she wanted to tell Nive directly. Although it was a bit confusing, she still wanted to convey it to Nive. She adjusted her voice to imitate Lady Nini speaking to the princess. Anyone born with the power of the sea carries an unusual obsession. The deceased emperor was no exception, and the current emperor, Ario, also has a similar obsession with his sisters. This obsession could be friendship, romantic love, or familial affection, but Nive didn't understand why her mother would discuss this with her. It turned out this was the beginning of what Lady Nini wanted to say to Nive. She said, if one day the crown prince went mad for her, she should stay away from him. If she could alleviate his madness, he wouldn't be obsessed. After all, due to the age difference, the crown prince would see her as a younger sister. To the people, they would become family with Cayen. Nive's mother believed that because she was the dragon's child, she hoped she would fulfill all her responsibilities and obligations. Aiden felt that. The Crown Prince seemed to be infatuated with Nive, as he came to see her every day. Nive wasn't too sure. Even though she hadn't met him, she understood what kind of person her mother was. Compared to herself, her mother prioritized sharing with the people. As a noble, her mother aimed to be worthy of her responsibilities. She truly admired such a person. Aiden felt it was fortunate that the Crown Prince cherished the Crown Princess, but she found the idea of becoming family with that guy disgusting. Nive guessed her brother had heard everything she said. Cayen was stronger than Hebo, so she thought that was why he disliked him, but he insisted it wasn't true. Nive still believed she was right. Hebo thought he needed to bring something to shut her mouth next time. A few days later, Nive was taken outside the palace to play. Holding the plush turtle given by the Emperor, she happily ate the food the maids fed her. It turned out she was enjoying delicious snacks with the Crown Prince and Aiden. She told Cayen she didn't like being called Popo and wished he would stop. She really didn't like it. Nive couldn't understand why Nathan had created that nickname. She felt like she was being treated like a little kid. Cayen wanted to ask what he should call her. He wanted a name only he could use. Then he thought of a name, Nikki, and asked Nive how she felt about it. She closed her eyes, contemplating the name Nikki for a long time. Then she decided to accept the name. Cayen was delighted that Nive liked the name he gave her. Cayen then affectionately called Nive his Nikki. Nive realized this was a bit dangerous. What if he didn't let her go later? She was merely playing a role in alleviating his madness, so she figured Cayen would still be okay with other people. So before she left the palace, she had to reach the secret library to learn about their knowledge. Cayen smiled and told her that if they married, she would become the queen and could freely enter there. But Nive frowned, saying that was still far off. Instead, Cayen decided to give her a gift. Saying that, he took out a beautiful box, wanting to give it to Nive. Nive was very curious about what was inside, so she opened it. She found a sleeping water spirit inside. It was a spirit of water, and she noticed it seemed to have been in this state for at least 500 years. Those with the ability to merge with water could make a contract with a water spirit. If they gained the power of the water spirit, they could breathe underwater for a period of time. Cayen guessed that if it were Nikki, she would definitely awaken that soul. Nive thought breathing underwater was a necessary ability for her, but the water spirit knew a lot and would help her in other areas. Clasping her hands together, she hoped it would wake up soon. She conveyed her thoughts to the water spirit, saying if it wanted anything, to ask, and she would find other water spirits for it. Sure enough, the water spirit replied, asking her to find its other half. It told her that its other half was also out there, as some people had forced them into this situation. Since Nive had also been sealed for 1,000 years, she understood the water spirit's feelings. She made up her mind that if she encountered those villains, she wouldn't let them go. If she learned more about sealing techniques and understood them well, finding the water spirit's other half would shed light on her own current seal. Nive immediately agreed and promised to help the water spirit achieve this goal, no matter how much time or money it took. If she could understand her own seal, she would save the other half at any cost. Holding the water spirit, she looked up and asked Cayen where he found it. He told her he bought it at an auction house. Then she told him it was only half, and the other half was still lost somewhere else. Cayen was surprised to learn it was only half, realizing a complete set must consist of two pieces, a clearly defined pair. So first, they needed to gather as many water stones as possible. Coincidentally, there was an auction for the world's highest quality water stones, but it was held at night, not during the day. Despite this, Cayen asked Nive if she wanted to go with him. She grabbed his finger, wanted to indicate she certainly wanted to go. Well, Cayen found Nive to be a charming little rascal and agreed to go together. Nive thought of the water spirit's other half, promising she would definitely find it. The water stones came from a famous place, known as the Waterstone Clan. If someone had sealed the water spirit, naturally, they could use stones of a similar grade. Nive thought that if she found an item of the same grade and origin as the water stone, finding the pair of water spirits would be easy. For a moment, Nive almost didn't recognize Cayen in his disguise. He told her that her two brothers would be at the palace for the next few days, but while they were out today, he wanted to buy a gift for Nathan. And what did she think? She was surprised, wondering why the Crown Prince wanted to buy a gift for her brother. Was Nathan going somewhere far away? She guessed Cayen wasn't planning to say directly. Nive thought buying a small gift was fine since she already had the main present in her hand. It was a blank check, a priceless treasure for her brother. By this time, the carriage had brought them to the auction house. There were many people outside. Cayen told Nive they had arrived, and Nive looked out curiously. He told her there would be many people at the auction, and even with bodyguards, she should hold onto him tightly. Nive sweetly agreed to the crown prince's words, and so they entered the auction, which was about to begin. Cayen handed Nive a pair of opera glasses, thinking she would look even better wearing them. She thanked him, and because the glasses were heavy, Cayen offered to hold them for her while she looked. From afar, she could clearly see the items in the boxes. Nive thought item number 9 looked good. Just then, the host appeared, thanking everyone for coming today. He announced that the final auction was about to begin, urging everyone to put all their money in. Nive immediately told the crown prince she wanted item number 9, and he readily agreed. However, since waiting for number 9 would take a while, he suggested she take a short nap. Nive didn't want to sleep and wanted to continue watching. Cayen wondered if Nive wasn't sleepy. It seemed she didn't want to miss anything. But because she was in a child's body, Nive started to feel very sleepy. Although she wanted to hold on a little longer, she couldn't resist the drowsiness. Finally, item number 9 arrived, and Nive immediately opened her eyes wide. Being a very wealthy person, the crown prince told Nive not to worry about the money and just bid. Many people raised their hands, and the water stone started at 1,000 gold coins, then 1,500, then 2,000. After a while, the price had already risen to 5,000 gold coins. While focused on watching the auction, Nive noticed a guy she had seen before. She called to Cayen, pointing out that the man was Robaro. She confirmed he was indeed Guang, Jeshu's subordinate. Cayen felt they needed to get what Robaro wanted most. Nive thought the man seemed to be fully invested in the number 9 water stone. Cayen then suggested they should make their move. After a fierce round of bidding, the number 9 water stone fell into Nive's hands. She happily showed off to Cayen, saying his pride was hurt and he had left. Seeing his angry expression, they both found it amusing. Of course, they had to take advantage of this opportunity. Now I wanted to grab a few more. In a moment, they would showcase the next batch of water stones. Many different water stones were displayed, and among them was one similar to the one Nive possessed. She immediately recognized it as the one she needed. This was the matching pair to the water spirit Nive held. There was no mistaking it. Nive wondered why she was so lucky today. Excellent. This time she had to win the bid at the highest price. Robaro was outside earlier, furious at losing the bid, thinking it wasn't suitable for a child. Robaro's king had ordered a waterstone appraiser, and he was to bring a waterstone worth the equivalent of 1,000 stones. He felt dread, believing this stone was far better than any he had collected so far. If he had known this stone would be shown, he wouldn't have wasted time looking at the stones already purchased. He gritted his teeth, angrily thinking it couldn't end like this, pondering the 2 people who had won the stone. He wanted to kill them. Just as he muttered this to himself, someone appeared before him, asking whom he wanted to kill. A group of bodyguards surrounded Robaro. This made him panic. One of the men told him the crown prince had ordered an investigation and the retrieval of all the stones he had purchased. The man had a premonition that he wouldn't be able to keep any of the stones he had invested in and would return empty-handed. After returning from the auction, Nive had collected several precious water stones. The pink stones looked like beautiful jewels she had seen before. The first one was rather large, so she could only make 4. The 2 fish spirits of the water spirit appeared, asking Nive what she wanted to do. She told them she was going to cast a spell so that those connected by magic, no matter how far apart, would know each other's condition, and if one person was injured, all the pins would light up red. Nive was very happy because she had finally finished making the pins, but because she had used too much energy, Nive lay exhausted on the floor. The 2 fish swam over and asked Nive if she was all right, and she replied that she was fine. In contrast, she wondered how she herself had been sealed. Saying this, she reached out and cupped the small fish in her palms. The water spirit closed its eyes and began to sense Nive's body. It told her it was a sealed preset for resurrection. It explained it was a seal of time and resurrection. If time ran out, the seal would be lifted, allowing her to be resurrected. This meant they couldn't kill her, so they sealed her instead. The ability to not forget oneself and one's memories within the seal was a characteristic of the resurrection seal, along with magical protective powers to prevent external harm. Nive believed the little fish wasn't lying to her because the ocean never lies, so it was all true. However, it seemed like someone had told her those words were false. Despite this, she still realized that Cayen and Domi had betrayed her. She didn't know what she would be resurrected to protect. The water spirit was certain of what it had read and the meaning of the seal. Nive imagined Cayen and Domi appearing beside her, wanting her to believe they were telling the truth, that he had promised not to leave her alone. Because of these words, Nive began to hesitate, constantly thinking about those two liars. Fortunately, her mind was still clear enough to recognize that those two had betrayed her. She believed it didn't matter what kind of magic it was. They hadn't told her anything when they sealed her, hadn't explained anything to her, and hadn't gotten her consent. Nive would never forgive these traitors. After some thought, Nathan appeared with a bright expression. He approached where Nive was sitting and cheerfully asked if she was well. Nive was also very happy to see her brother. Nathan told her he had some matters to inspect in his territory and would return later. She didn't want her brother to leave at all, as they would be separated for a while. Nathan hugged Nive, truly not wanting to part with her. He thought about how their Hebo would grow up so fast. Nive asked her brother if he was going far away, and Nathan explained that he had to go to the extreme regions. As a noble, he had to participate in winter training, and because he was a noble, he had to go there. Nive wished she could go too, but she was just a small child. To ease her worries, Nathan reassured her it was all right. Everyone was going in that direction, including Mags. She went to her pillow and dug something out. She gave the magically connected pins to her brother. Nathan was very touched to receive a gift from his little sister. He held the pins preciously in both hands, wanting to tell the whole world he had received a gift from his sister. Nive was surprised he liked it so much. He replied with a laugh, saying it was only natural. Nive thought that although it was futile to trust others, it seemed there was no other choice. She reminded her brother to always carry it with him. Nathan promised he would never let it leave his side. Nive felt reassured by this. Then she raised her hands as if wanting her brother to pick her up. Nathan immediately understood his sister's intentions. She, like everyone else, was very emotional about separating from loved ones, and he understood the feeling. Despite this, she really wanted to hug Nathan to express her feelings. She warned him not to get hurt, or she would scold him. With that, the siblings embraced and said their goodbyes. A few days later, the Emperor had summoned Nive at 10 o'clock, but it was now 12 o'clock, and she hadn't seen him yet. Suddenly, she heard Bookie rushing in to report something, but she tripped and fell to the floor. Another person wasn't surprised by this, as it was a common occurrence. Nive wondered what was going on, and Bookie told her that Lucas, the Emperor's knight, was coming. However, she didn't know what else had happened. While still on the floor, Bookie tried to sit up and say something, but before she could get up, Lucas appeared, bowing to Crown Princess Nive. Nive guessed he was obviously there to explain the Emperor's tardiness, so she wanted to hear what he had to say. Lucas told her that the Crown Prince's condition was severely worsening. Upon hearing this, Nive was utterly shocked. Lucas said the symptoms started 2 hours before his arrival and were much more severe than usual. Now the Crown Prince had to endure. Nive anxiously called out to Lucas, asking why he hadn't told her. He explained sadly that this time, the symptoms were dangerous for the Crown Princess, which was why he reported it so late. Nive asked Lucas if Cayen was all right, deeply worried about him. He said it was much better now, but the Crown Prince's courtyard was ruined. Nive wondered how severe the situation must have been to ruin an entire courtyard. Lucas led her to see, and many people were gathered there. Upon arriving, Nive immediately raised her hand, calling out Cayen's name. At that moment, he seemed to be all right. Cayen was overjoyed to see the Crown Princess arrive. Nive immediately demanded Lucas let her go to Cayen. Taking his hand, she asked if he was okay. He murmured that he was fine. Because Nive was there, seeing him like this made her extremely worried. She didn't understand why this was happening. It was clearly a resonance, yet couldn't be stopped. Nive anxiously turned to a servant, asking if there wasn't any medicine that could treat this, and he replied that there was no way to treat these symptoms. She thought she really needed to become stronger. There had to be a way. Nive reached out her small hand and touched Cayen's troubled cheek. She seemed to have found a solution, physical contact with her. She had read that the more contact, the stronger the resonance. So Nive cupped the prince's handsome face in her hands. Then she added a kiss to his cheek. Since she had started, she went all in, repeatedly kissing his cheek, causing him to freeze. She believed her actions would definitely help him recover. Seeing Cayen sitting there speechless, she believed her kisses were powerful. It seemed he was feeling much better as he turned to her, thanking her with a gentle smile. Cayen smiled, saying she was his goddess of luck and happiness. He also felt very guilty for making her worry, and Nive was relieved as long as he was all right. Then she turned and held Cayen's hand, as if wanting to say something. Gripping his hand tightly, she declared that from now on, she would be his family. This greatly surprised him. He hadn't expected such mature thoughts from a little girl. So Nive urged him to tell her if he felt any pain. Hearing Nive say this, Cayen was so moved, he almost cried. He replied with a bright smile, saying that of course he would, since they were family now. After that incident, Nive returned to her palace. At this time, the emperor came to see her, wanting to explain his tardiness. But Nive displayed immense anger. Aria waited to see how long she would stay mad. Nive shook her head and turned to leave. She was really, truly angry. But thinking it over, she realized she wasn't that angry, as it was already too late. She wondered why the emperor even wanted to ask her anything. Would that make her less angry? Nive began plotting in her mind what to do to punish the emperor. Then she thought of a way, holding out her hand and asking him for money. Nive reasoned that her time was money, and she had waited for him for a long time. Every second of hers was worth 100 gold coins, multiplying from there. The emperor was shocked beyond belief. He felt that even for loan sharks, that was too much. Nive started crying, expressing her disappointment at having waited so long after all. Seeing this, Ario wanted to explain, but Nive continued to act truly exhausted. Ario held his head in regret, thinking that the imperial budget couldn't be wasted like this. Instead, the emperor decided to give her a gift, wondering what she thought about that. He offered her the ability to play with a boat anytime she wanted. Ario would gift her a beautifully carved boat, one that would never sink thanks to magic. Knowing she could go out to sea with this boat, Nive was overjoyed. But she didn't want Ario to use magic. She was thinking, what if the boat capsized and sank? Furthermore, Nive wanted to ask Ario how powerful his magic was. The emperor replied that it was worth about a pair of gold coins. Then Nive wanted that too. She raised her hands in supplication, showing her sincerity. She told the emperor it would be stingy of him not to give it. She believed that bag contained a lot of things. Ario laughed, holding his head, wondering what he was doing with this child, and immediately agreed to Nive's request. Nive clapped her hands in gleeful anticipation, calling for the carved boat and the gold bars to come to her. Elsewhere, Prince Cayen sat alone, gazing out the window. He felt truly happy, doing what he wanted to do. Cayen thought that occasionally speeding up their relationship wouldn't be bad. He believed that even his uncle couldn't let those two play around Nive. Afterwards, Cayen left, planning to go somewhere immediately after this thought. He touched the fabric on the table, his thoughts drifting to Nive. At some point, he would have something of his own as well. Cayen felt his mother was right. He believed Nive was his and his alone. No one was allowed to take her away from him. A few days later, on the day Nathan left for winter training, which would last from 6 months to a year, many mages like her prepared spells. Nive wondered if they could prevent all attacks or accidents. At this time, Hebo was taking Nive there to say goodbye to her beloved brother. Seeing him in his cool military uniform, Nive called him over. She wanted him to stay with her a little longer. Nathan obeyed, running to her side. He sat down and said to her, "Are you going to give me a kiss and say good luck with your training?" Nive wanted Hebo to come a little closer to her. He teased her, asking if she thought he was so handsome she wanted a closer look. Although she replied that she didn't, Nive still hugged her brother tightly, putting all her strength into it today. No matter what happened, he wouldn't die. Nive would use her protective magic. Then she kissed her brother's cheek, telling him to be careful. Nathan was exhilarated by the strength his sister had given him. He hugged her again, tears in his eyes, reluctant to part. He felt like he possessed the whole world. Hebo simply reminded his brother to be careful, not to be careless. But Nathan replied that he shouldn't worry about him, just take good care of Bobo. Hebo patted his brother's shoulder, encouraging him to get ready to depart. After saying goodbye to everyone, Nathan had to leave. Nive felt incredibly sad because she wouldn't see her brother for a long time. The feeling was truly awful. He would be back in a year anyway, but Nive cried because of this farewell. Hebo hugged her tightly to comfort her. He told her it was normal for children to cry, so she should let her feelings out. Then the two embraced affectionately, which somewhat helped ease Nive's longing for her brother. In the following days, Nive pondered what could happen to a 7-year-old child, wondering what the worst thing could possibly be. Perhaps she already knew the answer. Nive looked out the window with a thoughtful expression. Just then, she noticed something strange attacking from behind. She recognized it as a poison needle. Nive, holding the poison needle in her hand, thought that no matter how big or how many there were, even poison wouldn't affect her. It was just liquid. Nive pulled it out of her body and threw it away. She felt incredibly uncomfortable. She shouted, telling the hidden assassins to stop doing that. Nive, ready, told them she would bring 3 people, so they should come out quickly. She held a magic rope in her hand. She thought they were shameless. She tied the rope around their necks, dragging them to kneel before her, wondering why they would assassinate a small, pitiful child like her. She asked them if they had any conscience, but Nive noticed one of the assassins staring at her, his face pale. She wanted them to apologize to her, but the assassins just lowered their heads without saying a word. She tightened the magic rope around their necks, punishing them for not answering her question. Nive thought they dared to disrespect her orders, so she had to teach them a lesson. The assassins cried out in pain, but these fellows were incredibly stubborn. However, she realized she had sealed their mouths, so they couldn't speak. Then, she unsealed their mouths, demanding they repeat after her immediately. All 3 knelt down and apologized to Nive. Indeed, no matter what reward they received, there were places they could go and places they couldn't. Then, she approached one of them, asking him if he understood, which terrified him. Nive thought that since she was only 7 years old, this was the most appropriate way to speak. Compared to when she was born, using the power of the ocean had become much easier. The act of assassinating the crown princess was punishable by death. But since they were only assassins, the fault lay with those who manipulated them. These fellows looked inexperienced, so she thought they might be useful to her. Nive decided gleefully that she wanted to lock them in the stone prison first. With that thought, Nive immediately took action. After completing the task, Nive breathed a sigh of relief, but she was surprised to find that it was already 9 p.m. Cayen would be arriving soon. Nive could hear footsteps approaching, so she knew he was coming. Usually, Cayen arrived at 9:30, so why was he so early today? She worried that if he discovered she had dealt with the assassins, he would surely worry and scold her. Nive came up with a plan, climbing into bed and pulling the covers over herself, pretending to be asleep and acting as if she knew nothing. When Cayen arrived, he sat by the bed and woke Nive up, telling her he was there. Nive played along, sitting up and feigning surprise at his arrival. Cayen asked her what happened last night, but she denied knowing anything. Cayen chuckled, telling Nive that if that were the case, he would take away the people locked up in the dungeon. Nive continued to feign ignorance about what Cayen was talking about. Cayen expressed his sadness, thinking that he must not be trustworthy enough for Nive to tell him the truth. She hastily explained that wasn't the case. Nive thought it best to change the subject, so she asked him why he had come so early today. Cayen told her there would be a banquet today, and the matter would be discussed at the banquet. Nive still hadn't finished pondering what could happen to a 7-year-old, what the worst possible thing could be. Cayen mentioned that the discussion would be about whether to continue searching for the people who went missing during winter training. Nive remembered Hebo, who had participated in that winter training and still hadn't been found. It had already been 5 years, and the thought brought a deep pang of sadness to her heart.